of the meeting. Tell me when we're good to go, please and thank you. James, are we good?
Yeah. Do you want one now, John?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Thomas. Good morning. Now I call the meeting to order. Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment to order. My name is Jackie Jacobson. I'm the MLA for Nunavut and the chair of the committee. Today we'll receive a public briefing with the Minister of Infrastructure, Honourable Diane Archie, and staff on the 2022-23 Energy Action Plan. Today's meeting is a public meeting and being live streamed on the Assembly social media channels. We'd like to remind all members, the presenters, that all questions and comments are directed to myself as chair. And
did we lose the chair?
Thank you. Yeah, he seems to have dropped off the connection, so we'll just give it a few minutes, please.
Thank you. We've lost Jackie Jacobson, the chair. So my name is Katrina Knockleby. I'm the MLA for Great Slave. I will take over chairing until we can get Mr. Jacobson back. I will ask my colleagues to introduce themselves.
Kevin O'Reilly, FrameLink.
And members on the phone?
Rocky Simpson, Hay River South.
Jane Wayellen Armstrong, MLA for Mopi.
Thank you very much. And now I will ask Madam Minister to introduce herself and her staff and proceed with any opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At the request of the committee, we are here to provide an update on the development of a 2022-2025 Energy Action Plan and a 5-year review of the 2030 Energy Strategy. In this briefing, we'll also provide an update on the work done, also to inform new action plan, including the results of the hydrogen workshop. So with me from the Department of Infrastructure, I have Assistant Deputy Minister of Energy and Strategic Initiatives, Mr. Robert Jenkins, Mr. Robert Sexton, Director of Energy, and Mr. Andrew Stewart, Director of Strategic Energy Infrastructure. Madam Chair, the GWT took an extensive public engagement when it developed the 2030 energy strategy. So what we heard is that people cared about the cost of energy, energy security, and community self-reliance, as well as environmental impacts. From this input, we designed the energy strategy and action plan to address the issues. We've come to a point where the 2019-2022 Energy Action Plan needs to be replaced with a new 3-year plan. We also need to plan for the 5-year review of the strategy in 2023. A lot has changed since the strategy was released in 2018. There is renewed focus at the national and international levels to be able to achieve greenhouse gas emission reductions. There's new federal policy and funding, and technologies are changing quickly. This means that GWT will have to adapt its approach and be ready to jump on these new opportunities. We are in the process of developing this 2022-25 Energy Action Plan. There has been significant work to bring together the evidence we need. This includes requests for public input, workshops on hydrogen and electricity policy, studies on liquid biofuels and policy issues, and our own internal research. We have also started modeling to better understand the impacts that the carbon tax, the new federal policy, and GNWT actions will have on our emissions, energy mix, and economy. This modeling will also explore potential pathways to net zero emissions for the NWT. So today in our update, we will provide a summary of the issues we're facing, what our GHG emissions trends look like, the results of the 2019-2022 action plan, and what we've learned from research, also what we heard through engagement, as well as how we're going to review the 2030 energy strategy and the feasibility of a net zero pathway for the Northwest Territories. Our priority remains focused on ensuring Northerners have access to affordable, secure, and sustainable energy. I will now ask, I don't see Mr. Chair back, but I will now ask Madam Chair if Robert Sexton, Director of Energy for Department of Infrastructure, to be able to deliver this presentation on these issues. And following that, we'll respond to any questions committee may have. Queen Aini.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Please go ahead, Mr. Sexton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to brief committee on what we're doing to renew the action plan and review of the 2030 energy strategy. If I could have slide 2, please. Next slide. Presentation overviews. Today I will cover what the issue is, some of the background and context, a summary of the existing 2030 energy strategy, what our emissions trend and targets look like, the results of this most recent 2019-2022 action plan, funding and resources that we have allocated and identified currently, what we've learned so far through the years that we've spent implementing the actions, what we've heard through the engagement that we recently undertook, and the research we've done to renew the action plan, what the process is going to look like to review the 2030 energy strategy. I will provide committee with a short overview of what net zero is and what that really means for the NWT. A slide on pathway development work, and then a look at what the energy picture looks like here, where our energy comes from and where it goes, and then some process and timelines involved with this process. Slide 3, please. The issue is that the current action plan ended March 31st, 2022. Under the energy strategy, GNP committed to releasing sequential 3-year action plans. We are currently developing the 2022-25 energy action plan for release this year. New funding will be required to resource the new actions, especially as existing federal funding sunsets, and we're also planning for the 5-year review of the 2030 energy strategy, which will dovetail with the climate change strategic framework review. Next slide, please. Some background and context. So we developed the 2030 energy strategy concurrent with the climate change strategic framework over 2016 to 2018. This involved extensive research, modeling, and engagement. In fact, we invested over $400,000 and undertook regional public engagements at the time. The GNWT set a greenhouse gas reduction target based on the federal pan-Canadian framework on clean growth and climate change, which we are signatory to. This target is 30% below 2005 levels by 2030. So clearly the national and international context has changed since then. The federal government has since updated its targets to be 40% below 2005 by 2030 and is pursuing net zero by 2050. we have a lot of work to do to understand if the technology exists and the funding that's going to be needed to commit to any new targets. Slide 5, please. I wanted to give committee a sense of the scale of the issue. This is a bit of a complicated diagram, and it's called a sand key diagram. What I'd like to draw your attention to is the left side. This shows the energy flows in the NWT from sources on the left side to where it gets used on the right side. But I really want to show committee here is what's on the bottom left corner. That is the refined petroleum products used in the NWT, and on the top is the sources of renewable energy. That black chunk represents almost 500 million liters of diesel, of fossil fuel, per year. That's the scope and the scale of the issue. So there's a lot of work to be done to understand how we can decrease fossil fuel use across sectors in a way that's going to ensure stable energy costs and have a secure energy system. Slide 6, please. A quick overview of the 2030 energy strategy. The overarching goal of the strategy was to guide the development of affordable, secure, and sustainable energy for transportation, heat, and electricity in the NWT. This overarching goal was established through extensive public engagement and public feedback. With what is critical to understand here is that the energy strategy isn't just about emissions reductions, but also about affordability and security, and they're all interrelated. In the strategy, there's 6 specific strategic objectives, one being working together to find solutions with community engagement, participation, and empowerment. 2 being reduce emissions from electricity generation in diesel-powered communities by an average of 25%. 3 is reduce emissions from transportation by 10% per capita. 4 is to increase the share of renewable energy for space heating to 40%. 5 would be increase residential, commercial, and government building energy efficiency. And 6 is the long-term vision to develop NWT's energy potential, address industry emissions, and to do our part to meet national climate change objectives. Slide 7, please. All right, so this gets to the heart of what the energy strategy is about and how we assess projects. It's the need to balance greenhouse gas emissions reductions and the environmental impacts, the general sustainability of the energy system against the need to have secure, reliable energy at an affordable price. This is critical. It's not just an inconvenience. If power goes out in a community at -40, it can quickly become a major emergency. Slide 8, please. Next slide. Yeah. So this is a figure that shows the NWT's emissions trends and target. I actually have some updated numbers for this. The official national inventory numbers came out on Friday, which was after we submitted this presentation to committee. I will provide the numbers and explain the figure. You can see that the target has changed a bit since we released the strategy. That's because the numbers get updated frequently based on new methods and things like that. Currently, based on the official data, in 2020, we were actually 19% below 2005 levels. This figure does say 12%, but that's inaccurate. You can see in 2005 we were at about 1,725 kilotons. Right now, based on the most currently available data, we're at 1,401 kilotons, and the target is 1,208 kilotons. You can see there's generally a downward trend. What's important to note here is that we're not the only actor in this space. There's other people. So the dotted line with the star is the 30% reduction by 2030. You can generally see that the emissions trend is declining. The green wedge from 2020 to 2025 that you see there represents the greenhouse gas reductions that we can take credit for under the 2019-2022 Action Plan. It's important to note that we're not the only actors here. Indigenous governments and organizations, the carbon tax, and new federal government actions will all act to reduce emissions as well. We have commissioned modeling to help us understand what the combined reductions activities for the various actors will achieve. Where we are currently and with the actions that we can account for, there is a 129 to 149 kiloton gap between 2025 and 2030 that we have to fill to reach our 30% target. And I wanted to bring your attention to the insert in the bottom. What that graph is the trend lines for how efficient our economy is at using energy. And generally, we've become more efficient in using energy. The energy we use is less carbon intensive, and in general, we're using fewer greenhouse gas emissions per unit of GDP, which means we're generally becoming more efficient in our economy. So this isn't just about changes in industry. We generally are getting more efficient in how we use energy, and that's good news for the NWT because it makes us more competitive. Next slide, please. Slide 9. So some results from the 2019-2022 Action Plan. The objective was to reduce emissions by 56 kilotons by 2023. Of the 63 actions and initiatives organized, there were 63 actions and initiatives organized by 6 strategic objectives, such as support for the development and implementation of community energy plans, the Nunavik Wind Project, transmission lines, research on alternative renewable energy, a rebate on zero-emission vehicles, enhancements to the Arctic Energy Alliance programs and services, and implement the greenhouse gas grant programs. The plan was originally to invest $227 million. We anticipate that we will have invested over $115 million by the end of 22-23. You see the bullet there. We have 2019-19, 2019-20, all the way up to 21-22, which is an estimate of what we invested last year. This lower amount is largely due to the rollout of various infrastructure projects that are taking some more time to implement. Of note is that none of the funding available has been lost because it's been federal funding. We've been able to move it forward, and those projects are still in process. This represents $115 million invested into the NWT economy and energy system. And in a future slide, I will provide a summary of the results of what that $115 million is going to get us. Next slide, please. By the end of this last plan, we estimate that we will reduce emissions by at least 46 kilotons by 2025. And these are through our own actions and initiatives. This could be as high as 53 kilotons, depending on program uptake on our application-based grant programs. This puts us roughly on track, given current funding levels, towards our target of 30% below 2005 by 2030. And we will gain some additional reductions by 2030 as we fund more initiatives, given what funding we currently have. But currently, it's unclear the amount of funding that will be required to reach our 30% target. And we're almost certainly going to be relying on more federal funding becoming available to increase our level of effort. As of right now, 57, so 90% of the actions under the action plan were initiated or are currently ongoing. 6, or 10%, were not fully implemented. 3 of those were related to energy education and outreach initiatives. 1 was an inventory of large non-government buildings for energy use and heating potential, and a rebate program through the AEA on auxiliary heaters for long-haul trucking. So all of the substantial actions under the action plan were initiated, and so that's I believe, a good result. Next slide, please. Here's a summary table of what we expect to achieve through the Energy Action Plan initiatives. This goes to 2025 as certain projects funded to date will take that long to be built and be brought online. So we've accounted for those future emission reductions in this table. You can see that by 2025, we will have reduced approximately 46 kilotons. That represents approximately 16 million liters of diesel equivalents in fuel savings. This means that by 2025, people, communities, and businesses will be saving about $20 million a year in energy costs, assuming $1.20 a liter. This is money in people's pockets that they're not spending on energy across the NWT. This means that through our action plan, investments will save people, communities, and businesses over $77 million over the 8-year period. That is an excellent outcome in terms of the amount we invested. And this does not include the investments that we're making in electricity infrastructure as well. So over the course of the strategy, there's an additional $120 million in federal funding being invested within electricity infrastructure. That is money that people will not have to pay in their rates as NTPC executes its capital plan and replaces aging assets. Next slide, please. This is a graphical depiction of energy strategy funding over the course of the funding and the strategy. The energy strategy currently has over $400 million committed until 2030. That's not including any investments in the Tolston expansion project. And this is a snapshot of the key funding pots. This is not all the funding, but the major pots. At the very bottom, in the light blue, you can see that the ongoing Arctic Energy Alliance funding at $2.7 million a year. In the slightly darker blue wedge in the middle, my apologies, it is difficult to see, we have the Low Carbon Economy Leadership Fund funding from the federal government, and with the GNW contribution, this represents $38.5 million, and that's the money supporting public-facing energy programs through the Arctic Energy Alliance and the Greenhouse Gas Grant Funds. In the yellow represents the Investing in Canada infrastructure funding, which is approximately $337 million until 2027. That is the majority of our funding, and it comes from the federal government, and it is by program design targeted at electricity infrastructure. So that's what the funding situation looks like right now. Slide 13, please. So we've learned a lot since bringing in the energy strategy, and we've had four years of implementing actions and initiatives. We're also have been undertaking work to understand things we need to know to renew the action plan and to review the energy strategy. We've learned a lot about what things cost and what is likely to work or not work, and what might be the best things to do next. We have developed cost curves that tell us what things have cost per greenhouse gas reduction. I will show these in the next slides. And we've also undertaken various studies and engagements, including a hydrogen and electricity workshop, studies on policy, electricity policy, liquid biofuels, jurisdictional and technology scans. We keep up to date on the current state of technologies. We've reviewed our actions to see what could be replicated or further investigated, and we are constantly looking for additional funding sources. Next page, please. This is what we've learned so far in terms of what it's costing per greenhouse gas reduction. This is what's called a cost curve, and it shows the cost per ton. This is for Arctic Energy Alliance programs over a 3-year period, and it represents the greenhouse gas savings that we achieved through the rebate portion, not the total cost of the. So if we give a rebate on an efficiency appliance, this is the value of the greenhouse gas reductions we get for that rebate, not the total cost of the appliance that people might spend, or an update to their insulation, for example. You can see that the rebates range from about $50 per lifetime ton to about $450. This is a good result, I think. We certainly have good uptake in the programs, and it shows that we're probably at about the right level in terms of encouraging energy efficiency products and retrofits. I'd like to caution the interpretation of this, however, because it might be easy to say that we should put all of our money into energy efficiency for space and water heating, which is the $50 per ton. But the reality is there's only so many furnaces that people are going to replace in the NWT per year. So there are limits to what the potential is in any given product or sector in terms of emissions reductions. So next slide, please. And this is a cost curve for some of the electricity infrastructure investments that we're doing. This one differs from the previous one in that it includes the full cost of the project. So these projects, in fact, will be 75% paid for through federal ISIP funding. But since we have the full cost, it's better practice to show the full cost per ton reduction. And this one here, you can see that the Inuvik wind shows some of the best reductions at a little over $300 per ton lifetime. And then going up Fort Providence T-Line, Fort Simpson, Watt T, Tuck LNG, and then Gamma T Mini Hydro. These are based on capital cost estimates right now. This is not yet the true cost. However, you can also see that these are fairly good dollars per ton estimates, ranging from $350 to about $1,000, $1,100. In terms of, so this is also a good result as these are good numbers as compared to the previous curve, which only included the rebate portion. Next slide, please. So what we learned so far, we've undertaken a number of studies and initiatives and workshops. We hosted a hydrogen workshop recently this year to investigate the potential future role of the technology in the WT. This was done to help inform the renewed action plan, as we know that hydrogen is a topic and a technology that is being pursued around the world as an energy carrier to help displace fossil fuels. Later this year, we will release a What We Heard document, but in summary, for community's information, we have some high-level conclusions available. What we heard is that we need more information about the technical and economic feasibility of hydrogen in the north. Both supply and end use need to be considered, so how you produce it and where you use it. We need to make hydrogen using low carbon tech, so using renewables and alternative energy. It could be used in the end for transportation, heating, energy storage, or for stabilizing electricity generation with intermittent renewables. That we heard that we need regional, local approaches, maybe more suitable, as there's not one size fits all solution across the NWT. There's specific regional needs. And we also heard that we need to plan for and undertake a pilot or demonstration project on hydrogen to prove the technology in the north. Next slide, please. We've also undertaken some public engagement. We put out a call for input into the action plan development. We received 7 public submissions with 58 comments. We've summarized what we heard here. These represent the repeating themes and comments we did here, so there was actually a lot of convergence on what we heard. We heard that we need to take on less and focus. We also heard that we need to do more, and we also need to focus on the biggest bang for the buck. This is conflicting advice. I will say, though, that we think we need to focus on the best solutions across as many sectors and targets as possible, given our funding and resources. And we also very much need to spread the benefit of energy investments across the NWT as well. We also heard that communities need more support, and we need to build our electricity infrastructure. We need to increase the community intermittent renewable caps that are currently in place to allow communities to self-generate more. And we heard that we need to try to integrate renewable diesel into generation. On the transportation side, we heard, next slide please. On the transportation side, we heard that we need to consistently support public uptake of electric vehicles, that the GNWT needs to lead by example with electric vehicles, and we need to develop renewable diesel for use in the transportation sector. Develop or support renewable diesel. For industry, we heard that we need to develop a plan to address emissions in industry. And for buildings, we heard that we need to continue to develop biomass and biomass district heating, and we need more support for the Arctic Energy Alliance and greenhouse gas grant programs. Next slide, please. Also, in general, we had some general comments. We need to increase our level of effort and our targets. We need to improve communications and awareness. We heard support for Lamart, support and we heard on Tallston support and some hesitancy, and we heard support for transmission lines. We also heard that we need to explore carbon offsets, emerging technologies like small modular reactors and hydrogen. I have to say that the input we received was very positive and constructive. I very much appreciate the public input we received at this time. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we have to plan for is the 5-year review of the energy strategy. Like was mentioned earlier, the world is changing, and the technology is changing, and there's going to be new demands on us. The 5-year review is scheduled to take place in 23-24. The actions that we need to take for the review will be part of the updated 22-25 action plan. We'll anticipate the review will involve some significant public engagement, as we're looking at more than just actions here, but reviewing our entire approach. As stated earlier, we have initiated modeling work to assess the impacts of the carbon tax, federal programs and policy, and GNWT actions on the energy mix, emissions trajectory, and the economy. We will use this model to validate any 2030 targets and explore net zero pathways and develop net zero pathways if technically feasible. There's a lot of uncertainty involved here, as Canada is still developing its policies and programs, and even the federal approach to net zero includes things called wildcards. And this means technologies that are unknown or under development. So even the federal approach to net zero includes unknown technologies moving forward. And this is going to be a challenge for the North, because often we find that even for technologies that are well established in the South, we have to spend time modifying them and de-risking them for application in our Arctic and subarctic climate. Next slide, please. So I wanted to provide committee with just a couple of slides on what net zero means. So this is clear. In this figure, we have a representation of today and tomorrow. So today you see that we have a dark bar there for emissions. In the future, ideally, you'd be reducing those emissions using low carbon technology, such as renewables and things like that, so that so a lot of the emissions go away. There's still going to be emissions. The concept between net zero is the net aspect, which is you still have emissions through fossil fuel use, but you have to use carbon removal technology, so it nets out to zero. These are so-called negative emission technologies, and it's literally removing carbon dioxide from the air or preventing it from going into the air because of things like carbon capture and storage. So that's what net zero means. It means that you're still producing emissions. You reduce it as much as you can through renewable and alternative energy, and what emissions you do, you net out using technologies, which on the next slide, please, I'll show you what that means. So what that means is on this figure here. On the blue column, it's end-use measures. So we're talking about electrification of things like heating and transportation. Energy and efficiency and conservation will always have a place because you should use less energy before you produce it. And there's things like fuel switching, so that's biofuels, wood, liquid biofuels like renewable diesel, and hydrogen as a fuel carrier. And the yellow column there, the zero emission electricity. So because you're electrifying, you need to ensure that you are producing electricity with non-emitting technologies, and you need to dramatically increase how much electricity you can produce. If we are to electrify things like transportation and heating, we will have to dramatically increase the amount of electricity we can produce. And that will have to be done through zero emitting technology, such as hydrogen and, such as intermittent renewables, solar and wind with battery solutions, firm renewables such as hydro, and then alternative energy such as nuclear and hydrogen. Those are just options, not policy recommendations, but this is the scope and scale of what the world has to look at. And then the third column, the carbon renewables, under the assumption that you'll still be emitting. This is the net aspect. So we have things like carbon capture and storage. So this is the technology that you might put on a large coal plant to capture the emissions as it goes up the stack, or direct air capture, which is creating systems to pull CO2 directly out of the air, greenhouse gas emissions directly out of the air. These types of things are best done at scale, large scale in southern jurisdictions. Then there are things like nature-based solutions. So that's land use management, forest management, agricultural management, things like tree planting and remediating disturbed land and agricultural practices that reduce emissions or sequester carbon. There's going to be limited opportunities for these things here, as there's not a lot of land disturbance in the north, and you have to show additionality when you do these. And then the third option is going to be buying offset credits from elsewhere. This is essentially, that means we fund projects elsewhere that reduce emissions and claim the carbon offset or reduction locally towards our net. We're going to have to look at all of these things when we look at pathways to net zero, to understand exactly what's available here and the type of investment that this is going to mean moving forward. Next slide, please. I wanted to bring this figure up again just to show committee the scope and scale of the issue. This represents almost 500 million liters of fuel. We do not have all of the answers yet on how to address that 500 million liters of fuel going forward. Each emission reductions and the solutions are going to be different in each sector. Each path forward is going to have its own problems, and we're going to have to try and find the most viable solutions that are going to work and are going to be reliable and are not going to be as economic as possible, given our unique northern challenges. Next slide, please. Here's a tentative process and timeline. This is just in 2021, we initiated the review of the action plan and undertook various studies and information gathering. In 2022, we continued the development of the action plan. We expect to have a draft of the Energy Action Plan for discussion internally this spring, and we're completing final engagement with stakeholders, including request for input from Indigenous governments and organizations. And we expect fall-winter release of the updated action plan. Over the course of this year, we're undertaking the modeling. Right now, we're working with our consultant to make the modeling applicable to the NWT economy and energy system. And then moving forward in 2023, that's when we're going to start the review of the energy strategy. And in fact, to be frank, we have started the work towards that, which includes the modeling and technology review and things like that. And then for a release of an updated or renewed strategy in 2024. And slide 25, please. And thank you, Madam Chair, for your time and the opportunity to present.
Thank you for that. I do believe that Jackie is back, or Mr. Jacobson's back, so we'll pass the chair over to him. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Katrina, for taking that lost internet. Thank you for your presentation. I'll now ask members if they have any questions. I'll start the list. Okay, Ms. Knockleby.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the presentation. There's a lot of information there to digest, and I understand that this is quite a hot topic, and appreciate it even more having been to COP and understanding some of our challenges with working with ENR and their explanations. My question is around, I guess, more sort of a practical sort of application that my constituents are concerned with, which is with the Arctic Energy Alliance programs that many people would like to have the audits done, would like to have, their homes assessed so that they can do better. However, I know there's a huge backlog and a lack of technical expertise in the territory. I've seen on social media people contemplating bringing up their own tester assessor. So I'm just wondering if the department is looking, considering that this is a good portion of our strategy, are we looking to actually do that ourselves, or the GNWT do it themselves, in order to reduce some of that backlog so we can kind of get people moving forward and keep the momentum going? I think it's important that if people are reaching out to start doing this process, if they're sort of reaching a 2-year waiting period, then perhaps they'll lose their interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Knockleby. Madam Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, yeah, I understand that we need to do better at the assessments there. But I'm going to have Robert Sexton speak a bit about, what are we doing as a department to ensure that we stay on top of this. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Ms. Knockleby.
No, I think Mr. Sexton is to answer. Thanks.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Sorry about that. Mr. Sexton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is obviously a concern to us as well. There is a Canada-wide shortage of energy assessment professionals. Certainly with the introduction of the federal Greener Homes Grant, the federal program that provides rebates for energy efficiency upgrades for homeowners. There has been certainly an increase in demand. We are working with the Arctic Energy Alliance to increase capacity. We found that the Arctic Energy Alliance is best suited to administer and provide the level of service that's needed as an arm's length agency that's administering programs on the GNWT's behalf. Currently, we over the past year we have trained 2 additional energy auditors. I think we now have a total of 4, so we've doubled our capacity. We are working at reducing that wait list. Clearly, COVID's had an impact on that, where we weren't able to enter people's homes. We're also looking at options to bring in auditors from elsewhere, paying them to come here and help to reduce the load. So we are actively managing this situation, and we're hoping to clear that wait list as soon as we can.
Thank you, Mr. Sexton. Ms. Knockleby.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and I do appreciate that in lots of this types of areas, expertise is quite in demand. And I have brought it up before around, it's my understanding that, we could probably be looking at this as sort of the same way we look at environmental monitoring, where we look to train community members to do these types of audits. It's not rocket science. It's, often it's coming in, taking certain measurements, etc. And I do understand there's likely a certification process. However, this seems like a good way that we could possibly expand employment into smaller communities, have Indigenous partnerships and such. And then while we're getting everybody up to speed, being efficient, that type of mindset in our young people and youth will help them in the construction industry later. If they have an idea of how efficient homes work, then they can take those skills on with them, even if their demand is no longer there. So can the department speak about whether there are some partnerships happening around like an apprenticeship? I get that there has been 2 of 4 been recently trained, but maybe expanding that for people to take on lesser parts of the assessments so that we can move them through more efficiently. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Knockleby. Madam Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, that's a really good question. That's one I asked as well, to be able to have more community spread. I know we've just got 2 more in recently, so I'm going to ask Robert Sexton to speak a little bit more about that. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Mr. Sexton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we do, when we do work in communities, we do often look for a community energy champion, and we'll bring that person around. This is through the Arctic Energy Alliance, and help them learn. I don't think we've looked at specifically training people to become energy auditors, but I think in general, you know, we do try to find community champions when we go in and help with. So we'll have the sort of the regional AEA offices go into communities and help train somebody local. With energy auditors, you do need to have a certain base level of knowledge and understanding of building science, and as well as there is a certification process through the federal government that you have to go through. So it's a fair amount of training. We do need the capacity. Maybe it's something that we should look into to see how feasible that is.
Thank you, Mr. Sexton. Ms. Knockleby, another question?
I think I had 2, but I do have more questions. So.
Yeah. But, okay, Mr. O'Reilly, do you have a question?
Sure, thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the presentation. If we could turn to slide 8, please. And I know that Mr. Sexton talked about some new figures that were released on Friday, which probably would have made this a little more accurate, but I'm trying to understand what impact the energy strategy is really having on our greenhouse gas emissions. So if I look at this diagram from 2005 to 2020, what's your sense, or what's the witness's sense of why those reductions took place? Is it because of things like, you know, and I think, I'm just going to speculate, but things like Diavik bringing on its wind turbines, better fleet management at the diamond mines, because I've seen some of that in operation. I know Caddy now uses waste heat to heat the underground. You know, Snap Lake opened and closed during this period of time. Is that what's driving the general trend? And then I see the thin green line there, which is, I think, what you folks are taking credit for. So, yeah, just if I could get a little more insight into why this is generally declining and what influence, if any, we have over this. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Madam Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's a question I'm going to ask Robert Sexton to talk about. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Mr. Sexton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, this is a very good question. And as pointed out, it's a complicated situation, right? Because there is over time fluctuations in the economy. There is, mines come online. There's construction emissions. Mines come offline. Of course, government actions didn't start with the 2018 energy strategy. There were lots of efforts before that through the Arctic Energy Alliance and through the government's capital asset retrofit program and various initiatives like that, LED replacements across the thermal region, thermal communities. The reality is that the GMT is not the only actor here. We only started systematically tracking our actions with the introduction of the energy strategy. And really, emissions reductions from that strategy really only emerged after 2018-19, which would have been the first year of sort of the additional emissions associated with the strategy. I will tell you that as per the insert, we have become much more efficient. Our economy is becoming less carbon intense. And one of the things I do know is, for instance, energy efficiency in buildings has increased by 30%. Over that time period. So buildings are getting more efficient. Vehicles have gotten more efficient. There's clearly, industry's changed, but there's trends here across the energy sector that's contributing to that reduction over time. And like I said, that wedge there is just what we can account for. The carbon tax is going to have an influence. Federal policy landscape is going to have an influence. We will have better information on what that influence is going to be after we complete our modeling, but you can see the trend is downward. We're contributing to that trend, I do believe, and we will increase our reduction efforts, but there's a lot happening here.
Thank you, Mr. Sexton. Mr. O'Reilly?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, no, and I appreciate the additional comment about the building heating, because I know, and GMWT itself has made some huge progress through CARF in terms of moving most of our buildings to wood pellet boilers, particularly in Yellowknife. We got a wood pellet boiler at home. But then I see that, for the next the remaining 7-8 years to 2030, we still have a big chunk to go, and in terms of reductions. And I assume that we're still at, the 2030 energy strategy talked about a 517 kiloton reduction, which is what we need to make the Pan-Canadian framework target, but even that itself is shifting. The feds want to go now to 40% and net zero by 2050, which I think we have to if we're going to save the planet. But I'm worried about the back-end loading of our energy strategy, and I said this right at the start of it. You guys know that. So how are we going to actually get this? Because even if you kind of project the green bar and you take into account the actual lower emissions from Friday's release, how are we ever going to get to the target? I just can't see how we're going to do it. And that target itself is shifting downwards. So, and I think about some of the things that you said about, if I look at this energy efficiency thing, the biggest bang for our buck continues to be space heating of buildings. And investment in, shifting buildings to wood pellets, and some of the stuff that Arctic Energy Alliance actually does. Anyways, we can't possibly make the target, and the target is shifting downwards. So, yeah, you're being asked to do more with less. How are you going to do it? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Mr. Sexton? Mr. O'Reilly, can you hear me?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I guess I'd like to hear from the Minister and her colleagues here about how they're going to reach this shifting target that's actually going down by 2030, given what I've heard and where I think we need to go. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Madam Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, the member is correct. The target is 30% below our levels, our 2005 levels by 2030. And again, we're at 19%, which I thought it was at 12, but which puts, talking about the targets, the downward trend in some of the emissions, some of the projects that we're doing, like the transmission line to Fort Province, multi-year projects in Nuvik Wind. Our longer term action should see accelerating GHG reductions as they're brought online. But, I'm going to ask Robert Jenkins to speak a little bit more about the reduced GHG. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Mr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yeah, as the Minister mentioned, our current targets are 30% below 2005 levels to get to 2030. And so, as we mentioned during the presentation, we're going to need new initiatives to meet that target. We're going to need renewed and enhanced and increased federal support to be able to do that. We're currently at 19% before 2005 levels. We're generally on track. We're generally moving in the right direction. As we move forward, there are a number of larger projects. They do take longer to implement, some of the transmission line projects in particular. and we will see larger leaps towards our goals there. But one of the things we're doing, as we move forward and, go into our next 3-year action plan, as we look at the energy strategy and during our 5-year review, is we're looking at these pathways. What will it take for us to be able to meet 30%, meet different levels? What are the pathways moving forward? What are the actions that are needed? What will it take to get there? What level of support financially will it take to get there? What technologies will it take? So these are all things that we need to do as we move forward. A whole part of the 3-year action plans, Mr. Chair, is to be adaptive to change. We know that the landscape's changing and we need to change. So we need to do the work to be able to make informed decisions, to be able to get to, can we get to different targets in the future, and what will it take to get there. So that work is underway, and it's work that we're going to roll into our next iteration of the action plan and review the energy strategy. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Next on, I have people on the phone. Mr. Simpson, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I do. Thank you for the presentation as well. I guess the question I have is, as we see costs and the cost of living rising, people are concerned and, and they're looking for ways, I guess, to save. And I guess, as we experience these rising costs, what, if any, impact will that have on moving the energy action plan forward? Will those rising costs take away from it and maybe slow the process down? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. Madam Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to see if Sexton Robert can speak to that.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Mr. Sexton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Committee is correct. I think that's going to have rising cost of energy is going to have an impact, and in 2 ways, in fact. One, with increasing cost of energy, it is going to likely make some larger projects more expensive to implement on that side. However, as energy prices increase, it does make the business case for the projects much better. So there's going to be a balance there between the projects are going to be more attractive in terms of the value of the fossil fuels saved, but we expect there will be sort of some inflationary pressures on construction costs. On a related note, as residents and businesses and communities experience increased energy costs, they will be sort of incentivized to seek more solutions, look at biomass heating more and look at energy efficiency more. So in that regard, we hope to see sort of more actions on the behalf of individuals and businesses and communities to look at their energy use and look at alternative renewable options.
Thank you, Mr. Sexton. Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. More and more, I guess I'm hearing about the cost of energy, and more so, I guess when you hear the NTPC coming out, looking for more money, and everybody's looking for more money for something, to manage their operations, to try and break even, but it all goes on the back of the people, and it's getting a little bit much. The paycheck seems to be shrinking, and so I'm just wondering if there's any other areas where we could look to assist people in reducing their costs. In the House we talked about electric vehicles, we talked about electric bikes, but one thing we don't ever really talk about, and especially when it comes to small communities, is that, like, I'm going to use Hay River for an example. It's spread over probably about 25-30 kilometers, but within the town itself, you still see a lot of people driving their vehicles and go downtown, and when they could probably be walking. So has there been any indication, or has anybody actually looked at the benefits of actually adding more walking trails in communities to get people off, their vehicles and not driving them downtown for something small to get them out exercising. Because it does two things. It saves on the environment and also maybe on the healthcare system as well. And the other thing is we talked about electric bikes as well, and but we don't talk about just regular bikes. And we want to give rebates for anything that might have electric motor on it. But at the same time, maybe we should be looking further than that and providing incentives to people who just say buy regular bicycles. And as kids learn that that's a mode of transportation as well. They they may stay away from the more costly the vehicles and emitting carbon as well. So those are things that I guess that more down to earth that I'm looking at, and just listening to people. Again, it comes to cost of living and people trying to make ends meet. And we always have these. We're always looking for that. Something to save us. Again, at Hay River, for instance, we've got. We're on a hydro system, but our rates are still high. I'm not sure why we're not using electric heat in our houses. We should be able to. When people are getting propane bills, heating bills of $1,000, $1,500 a month, we got to start looking at other areas and maybe fast tracking some of the things that we're trying to do. And again, I know it all comes down to money, and it comes down to really federal buy-in to it. So there's a couple of questions in there, so if you want to make some comments, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. Madam Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, those are really good feedback and comments on, what should we doing more to think outside the box. And, as we look to Arctic energy lines and increasing some of the funding that's going out to people in communities, I think that's really important. And, when you look at the engagement that we talked about, what we have heard so far, one of the things is under transportation on slide 18, where you talk about support public uptake of electrical vehicles, DWT lead by example with electrical vehicles, develop a renewable diesel. So there are a number of things that we've heard on some of the public engagement. But if I can get Robert Jenkins to speak a little bit more about what are some of the other activities that we should be doing to, and even just speaking with our colleagues at ITI in terms of parks and, what can we do better as a government. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Mr. Simpson, do you have another question? Hearing none.
No. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Simpson. Ms. Knockleby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question is around linear infrastructure corridors. To me, I note that when I looked at the Wati transmission line, that it was cutting across from like sort of a shortest distance A to B kind of scenario, but I'm wondering how much the department is looking at the idea of bringing power along the highway and then moving up, say, the Taser or other roads in order to create, like to me, if we're going to send a transmission line across the wilderness, then we're going to have to remote in to fix it, to deal with it. If we come down the highway, we're creating potential for future development along those areas for people that would like to have cabins in the Clecho area. So to me, it makes sense to invest a little bit more money up front and keep all of our infrastructure in one corridor versus having all of these ones kind of going randomly around. So I'm just wondering if the minister and the department can speak to whether or not this is being incorporated in future design for the energy system. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Knockleby. Madam Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, that's a really good question because I asked that myself too. We're doing a lot of different projects, but I want Robert Jenkins to speak a little bit more about the plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Mr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question on this. So we're working with the Toledo government right now to look at routing for the project. We provided some funds to the Toledo and we're going to update some historic sort of routing studies and analysis for that project. The shortest distance to connect Wati to the North Slave hydro system is to go along the existing winter road, roughly east-west right now, and that connects to the Snare hydropower facility directly. The new highway goes roughly north-south. It doesn't align with that optimal east-west routing. But again, I guess I would say is that right now we're working with the Tlicho to sort of reassess things and look at the routing for that project and really sort of what is the best routing for that moving forward that both the GNMT and the Tlicho government would like to see. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Madam, or Ms. Knockleby?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yeah, I appreciate that. And I'm glad that the Clecho should be in any way like leading that discussion. I guess why I'm so keen for this though, is that, we have such a barren stretch of highway from Fort Providence all the way up to Yellowknife. And then even Fort Providence isn't much off the highway. So to me, if we're running power down the highway, we allow for gas bar development. We allow for more amenities at the parks along the highway, all of that. So I guess my question would be, has there been a costing to look at what does it cost or what would it take to add the additional kilometers on to bring that along the highway versus just taking one of these routing? Is that part of the new routing investigation? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Knockleby. Madam Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to ask Robert Jenkins to speak a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Mr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So right now, our focus is really to connect Wati. We haven't been looking at that section to Fort Providence. We've been approaching from the other direction in terms of the Fort Providence T-line project, and we have received federal funding for that project. Right now, really, we haven't looked at that. We're really focusing on connecting that community. It helps us about 8%, I think, towards our goal of 25% in terms of reducing diesel or costs in diesel power communities. So really that's the focus right now, is to really look at getting the Wati and also getting from Fort Providence from the other direction. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Anybody, other questions from any other member? Mr. O'Reilly.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. If I could go to slides 14 and 15. And this is their title, What We Have Learned So Far. And these are showing some costs related to, per unit of greenhouse gas emission. And, the slide 14 shows the Arctic Energy Alliance programs, and I guess it really only looks at the rebate portion for 1 year. And then the next slide is some of the bigger energy initiatives from our friends here, and boy, it's on a completely different scale. The Arctic Energy Alliance stuff would be just even below the 100 mark for most of its. The other ones kind of creep up a bit there towards the end. But is there some way to get these on the same sort of scale? And I guess what I'm trying to work towards is getting the biggest bang for our buck. And if I look at these two, and I had a whole bunch of money to spend, I'd probably put most of my money into Arctic Energy Alliance, where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. But I also understand that at some point you're going to max out the amount of savings, greenhouse gas reductions you can get in the residential sector, or maybe the commercial or industrial sector in terms of space heating and so on. So, anyways, is that the kind of modeling work that you're looking at doing for the 5-year review? It's supposed to start, I guess, this year and finish next year or whatever. So, and will that modeling work contain, the assumptions that goes into some of this stuff? Because I'd like to see the assumptions behind some of this. Can we make that public, and can we make it explicit, and even allow people to do some of their own modeling if they wanted to choose a different kind of set of assumptions? Yeah, that's my question, Mr. Chair. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Madam Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, that's what we've heard. The tone of some of our engagement is we need to take on less in order to accomplish more, need to do more and focus on the biggest bang for the buck. So, I mean, that's what we've heard. And I understand where the member's coming from. I'm going to get Robert Sexton to speak a little bit more about the slides and the comparisons for the member. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Mr. Sexton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Absolutely. The first thing to note is that on the infrastructure slide, that's actually the full cost. So what we're really paying there is 25% of that. So when you look at that, in fact, the gap narrows a fair bit, right? Because one is total cost and one is rebate. What I will note, though, is there's no energy efficiency initiative that's going to give us 6,000 tons like Inuvik Wind is. So it's one of those things where we have to invest a little bit here, a little bit there. Agreed, it would be best to optimize where we put that money. Some of the funding sources limit what we can do with them. So, for instance, on the Inuvik Wind project and the other infrastructure, that's only money that can be used for infrastructure. In terms of the modeling, we will do our best to be as transparent about that as possible. It is a proprietary model done by Navius Group, so it won't be be a little bit of a black box. But whatever we can make public, we will. Because agreed, what we will look at for sure is the energy use per sector. In any given sector, there's going to be a technical potential, but in reality there's going to be an economic potential, and then there's what people are going to really be willing to do. So that's the target, right? To understand what people are really going to be willing to do. And you know, heating, for example, is only 10% of our emissions. Even if we get a 15% reduction in heating, that's only 1.5% of our total emissions. So there really is a limit to how much we can throw to energy efficiency compared to some of the larger projects, which is where they may appear to have a slightly more expensive dollar per ton, but there's no project that's going to give us 6,000 tons like Inuvik Wind is. So.
Thank you, Mr. Sexton. Mr. O'Reilly.
Yeah, thanks. I want to encourage our colleagues here to make as much of the modeling public and allow people to actually do their own modeling if you can find ways to do that. On slide 13, there's also a bunch of work that the department says is already done. Jurisdictional policy, technology scan, load growth study, community renewable cap study. I want to encourage them to release that information. It should have been probably released in time for this energy action plan, but it does need to be released in terms of the 5-year review, because those are, and I agree, I'm glad they're doing this work, but great that they're using it, but it needs to be released publicly so that people can see this and have confidence in the work that our colleagues are doing. So I just want to get a commitment from the minister that this kind of work is going to be released publicly. I know that there's other actions, you know, that are being done, even in the last bullet on the slide about investigations and research and so on into technologies. All of that stuff needs to be released publicly, and is that what the minister intends to do? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Did he freeze up?
I believe that Mr. Jacobson has frozen up, so I will take over again as chair. Please go ahead, Madam Minister.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Minister. Or Madam Chair, I'm getting mixed up with Mr. and Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good question. And you know, some of these studies are on website, and I'm going to see if Robert Sexton can speak a little bit more on the details on where some of these studies are. But I mean, if we can commit to them, then yeah, we'll be able to share that information. If I can, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Sexton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the outcomes of the hydrogen workshop, we are developing for public release document for that will be released. The load growth study, the community renewables caps, and the net metering study are available publicly on the website. The cost curves, the one for electricity is already available, and a lot of this information on what we've done and studied is available in the Energy Initiatives report that we release every year. In terms of the jurisdictional scans and whatnot, we haven't done a formal scan document. Normally that's work done internally to help inform us in terms of the actions. We will release as much as we can publicly, clearly.
Thank you. I'm just going to pop in here with my next question was around, I did hear Mr. Sexton say that once the NTPC investments are made and they do some work with their stuff, that we'll see power savings for consumers. However, it's always been kind of the opposite what I've been told, that because the NTPC system is so failing that any upgrades are really just keeping things at the status quo. So my question is, when can NTPC upgrades result in actual savings to our constituents or consumers? Thank you. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, good question. I'm going to get Robert Jenkins to speak a bit about that.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for the question. So obviously we work closely with NTPC. As people are aware, they're making a number of investments in their infrastructure right now. They have aging infrastructure that needs replacement. One of the things under the ISIP program, the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, is that we've got really over the life of that program, I believe it's $120 million that will be investing in the electricity system. And so that's $120 million that will not need to be included in any potential rate applications moving forward by the corporation. Ideally, as obviously as you replace aging infrastructure, hopefully it's more efficient. Hopefully you have less downtime. Of course, these are things that are beyond control sometimes, as people can appreciate. But really the investment in that infrastructure is to make things cleaner, newer, and more efficient. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for that, and I look forward to that time in which my power bill will go down. As one person living alone, it can get quite high, shockingly. I'm just going to check to see if any of the members online have another question. MLA Simpson, do you have any?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I do. I just want to ask, I guess, is that we're always trying to look at the environment and then to I guess to basically save it at some point, but and we're always looking at the programs that we have in the territory. We're always looking at the infrastructure we have here. When we have, you've got Yellowknife, Hay River, Fort Smith, and Fort Simpson. We're all close to the Alberta border, and Alberta has a lot of infrastructure there as well. And as an example, Hay River, being 320 kilometers from high level, and we know that rates there are a lot cheaper, power probably, and as well as gas. I think they use natural gas. So has the department looked at possibly having these southern communities in the Northwest Territories tie into Alberta infrastructure? Which would help with the action plan, but also help to possibly reduce costs to consumers. Because again, at the end of the day, that's the big thing. We're seeing people move out the territories just because of the high cost of living here now, and I don't think it's going to get much better, if at all, as we move forward. So we've got to start looking at other ways to to find some immediate or timely solutions to actually keep people here at the same time addressing environmental concerns. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And if I could just add, maybe if you could speak a bit to the conversation between Alberta and yourself, Madam Minister, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. So the Tolston is it's a huge project. I mean, you know, we're starting the engagement now, working with Indigenous groups, working with those that are affected along the route. Still in early stages. Would love for everybody to come to the table. I'm going to have Andrew Sturt speak a little bit more about the projects and how we're engaging with Alberta, engaging with other peoples that as we look at long term and reaching out to our partners. Thanks.
Go ahead, Mr. Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As members know, the third leg of the vision for the Tolson Hydro Expansion Project is to connect to the rest of Canada. We have engaged in the past with the Alberta Electricity Systems Operator and looked at opportunities to integrate with their system as well as with Saskatchewan. Neither jurisdiction from a renewable import circumstance needs renewable energy at this time. And in terms of the strategy and approach for the Tolson project in the here and now, phase 1 is actually intended to connect the 10 communities around Great Slave Lake, which will ultimately help to stabilize the cost of energy for our communities and also set the stage for green energy to serve industrial and transportation growth within that area. And so it is part of our longer term vision. It is not a cost-effective option to look at long transmission lines to other jurisdictions to reduce the cost of power. We actually have surplus power in the South Slave, Madam Chair, as it stands today. And so the distances associated with the market we would serve in the NWT is different than the distance just to the border or to the southern part of our territory, Madam Chair.
Thank you for that. MLA Simpson, do you have a follow-up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I do. Yeah, you know, that's the thing is that, you know, we always hear there's surplus power at Tolston, yet our rates are still fairly high here in the South Slave. I know it's less than, you know, what they are in the north, but, you know, here we are, we're paying, again, like I say, you know, we're paying, you know, $1,000 a month, some people, you know, if not more, for heating, when there's got to be a better way to do it. And, you know, maybe electricity is the way, like I said before. But that's just a comment. What I'd like to talk about is I've had an opportunity to talk to some folks from the School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary, and they're doing some work there on the Canadian Northern Corridors, and you know, and when I got hold of them, the one thing I was interested is that, you know, we talk about corridors. I'm glad the Ms. Knockleby brought that up, because, you know, we have the Mackenzie Valley, and, you know, that's a corridor that I like to see opened up. So I guess the first question would be is, you know, has the department been engaged with the School of Public Policy? Because I know that they're coming. I think they're coming to the north. I think they're going to do some roundtables, and I'm just not sure, you know, if the department has been, I guess, in talks with them. And the second question would be, you know, looking at a corridor down the valley, is that something that the department looks at when they're doing an energy strategy to see the impacts of opening that up, and if there's some cost savings, you know, with developing other forms of energy again, like you know, putting in maybe hydro sites or you know, anything like that, maybe easier access to biomass as well. So I guess those two things. Thank you.
Thank you, MLA Simpson. Madam Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to ask Robert Jenkins to see if we or the department has engaged with any partners on that. Thanks.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we have had some preliminary discussions with the University of Calgary School of Public Policy, the work they're advancing there in terms of looking at northern corridors. They are having some engagement sessions coming up, and staff, I believe, staff most definitely from the Department of Infrastructure will be participating in those. I believe there may be others from across the GNT as well. As we sort of advance all these different projects, if it's a road corridor, obviously it could in the future, depending on the economics and what's occurring in the region, turn into a communications and an energy corridor. These are things that we would need to look at. Some of the times we've got a pretty remote territory, as people know, long distances. Transmission line construction is expensive per kilometer. So it's not always something that go hand in hand. You may build a road, you might not build a transmission line to go with it. But it's definitely something that, we're trying to move a number of pieces of foundational infrastructure forward to try to help work towards not only our emissions reduction targets, but our economic goals as a territory. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for that. I'll just add that as of like 14 years ago at an engineering conference here in town, that was one of the things that came from Engineers Canada, was that we should really be looking at bunching our linear infrastructure together. Just from a repair standpoint, if you don't have to chop her into a hydro or to a power line, it's going to be cheaper than, it's going to be more expensive than when you can drive down a highway to it. So I do know that was definitely a thrust of Engineers Canada over a decade ago. That being said, I think we're coming up on noon here. I don't see any more questions here in the room. MLA Simpson on the line and Ms. Whalen Armstrong, if you have anything else, I'll let you follow up with the minister and her department directly. I think that thank you very much for coming today and presenting. I know it's a weighty topic that we're all very interested in, and we will definitely be coming back with more questions and looking for more information, I'm sure. So thank you very much. And this ends the live stream portion of our meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Sorry, I should have given you a chance.